Hello, my name is S.K. Williams, and today I would like to talk to you about religion. Or, more properly, I would like to talk to you about a common argument made by atheists who, of course, don't have a religion, about how hypocritical religious people are. And it's a rather common one. The only problem with their argument pointing out the hypocrisy of the religious is that it is as big a lie as when they say that they themselves are not religious, because atheism is not a religion. Atheism is a lack of belief in a god. Atheism is a religion, like not collecting stamps is a hobby. Or for that matter, when you point out how scripted atheist lines are, and how you've heard them all, being accused of the Gish Gallop and being told that the reason atheists all say the same thing is because they're simply citing the same facts, and it's like mathematics, like 2 plus 2 equals 4. The truth of the matter is that a lot of atheist arguments rely heavily on how they frame the topic and how they present the narrative. They're often more appeals to emotion than to reason and evidence. And they will sometimes admit that. They will simply quote Hitchens and say that those who were not reasoned into their beliefs cannot be reasoned out of them. But at the same time, it's fairly obvious that the atheists aren't just relying on childish mockery and insult to break through the delusional brainwashing of the religious because they've been indoctrinated, because they cannot use reason, that they're doing it as a part of an ego trip to tell themselves that they are better than the people that they are mocking and insulting. Which brings up the main problem. You see, my actual position has never been that atheism is a religion. My argument is that being an atheist does not mean that you have no religion, and that various things that atheists turn to instead of religion, such as the non-religious life stance of secular humanism, are themselves just religions. And the bulk of modern atheists who go about telling us how awful religion is and how irrational religion is and how delusional religious people are actually secular humanists. This is true of all of the atheist activists that came out of the New Atheism, and even Alex O'Connor, who claims to have once been a secular humanist but now isn't because he values animal life equally to human life, really is just a secular humanist because all of his beliefs align with secular humanist beliefs. Even his belief that man is just an animal and that animal life is equal in merit and value than human life would be, is something that is actually discussed in humanist literature. It boils down, when it comes to Alex O'Connor, to him not liking the label of humanism. But he still has all the same beliefs. Though we are supposed to pretend that once he stopped calling himself a humanist, that means he became this blank slate, or not necessarily a blank slate, he still had beliefs, but he became opaque. Nothing we know about humanism we can apply to Alex O'Connor because we don't know what his beliefs are until he tells us. After all, he's not a secular humanist, you can't point to humanist beliefs. But he is. He has all the same beliefs that a secular humanist has. He's still popular in atheist circles. He still has memberships in several of the same atheist organizations, like the National Secular Society. And therein lies the problem. Atheists today argue a great deal from how they define words and how they frame concepts without actually allowing you to question those concepts. And for a long time, we've allowed them to do so. I think that this is a mistake. Just like I think it's a mistake for Pope Leo, who recently apologized for the Catholic Church's complicity in the slave trade, to do so. Because every time Christians apologize for a past atrocity, it is simply taken as a confession of guilt, not as a sign of maturity. The church is never forgiven, and they just continue to attack the church based on it, but say, see? Pope Leo admitted it. The Catholic Church supported slavery. That means that if you're a Catholic today, you're part of an institution that supported slavery and are guilty of the slave trade after the fact. The only way to return is to give up Catholicism. And to give up Christianity in general, because the Bible itself is a pro-slavery book and all that. And it gets old because when you try and explain to them any sort of nuanced view, they'll say that you're using mental gymnastics, which is really not the case. Especially since atheists will use exactly the same arguments that Christians use when it comes to things like slavery. When it comes to their past heroes and past figures and past movements. The general argument for things like slavery go that religion, they never just single out one religion. They act as if all religions are synonyms for Christianity. Religion supports slavery because the Bible is a pro-slavery book that condones slavery. This is why Christian countries supported slavery. And it was the atheists, the agnostics, and the deists who came out of the Enlightenment first opposed slavery. Some Christians came later, but even then, no Christian denomination opposed slavery early on. And those who did oppose it came from radical ones that were closer to the freethinkers. But even those radical denominations supported slavery because the Bible is a pro-slavery book. And the people going it were even further along to becoming rationalists and freethinkers with no religion than their denomination was. They were radical outliers of radical denominations, where the vast overwhelming majority of Christians just supported slavery because the Bible said it was okay. And of course, that's not real history. That's polemic. In reality, Christians opposed slavery since the Middle Ages, at least, and you even have people like St. John Chrysostom saying that slavery would be abolished by Christianity. And when you look at the nuances, the modern atheist wants us to think of slavery by thinking of Kunta Kinte. They want us to think of black people kidnapped from Africa by white people and taken to America, only they make it white Christians. So it's all Christianity's fault that white people were supporting slavery. It's silly. But that is their argument. And there's no actual nuance to this argument. Which brings up the real point that I'm trying to make in this discussion. Because one of the other things they talk about religious people being hypocritical about, because they always make the distinction between atheists and religious people as if they're opposites, is the idea that they should be offended when someone offers to pray for them, or when someone says they will pray for them or do something else for them, like a candle in a church or do a service for them or anything along those lines. And I remember years ago, it was all over the internet because atheists hunt in packs and walk in lockstep uniformity with each other when they're the militant atheist variety. They're not really the rationalists and free thinkers that they say they are. They're really just a gang who all repeat the same slogans. But you still run into this every once in a while, but it's less common. At one point, it was basically every conversation would bring this up. They would be deeply offended by Mormons. They got onto an anti-Mormon kick for a long time. And Mormons, by the way, are a Christian denomination. They don't really listen to you otherwise. So what the Mormons do reflects badly on the entire Christian religion because they're a Christian denomination. Well, here's the problem. Mormons practice proxy baptism for the dead. A properly initiated Mormon who is temple worthy and pure and goes through certain ordinations to various priesthood levels can be baptized in the name of someone who has died, which is an unusual belief, to be fair. But the atheist community got very upset by this and went on and on and on about how awful it was. And people would sometimes point out that atheist has no basis for their anger. Because if religion is nonsense and the atheist is right that all religion is made up by man and it's completely an ineffective ritual, then all that happened is a man got wet after saying he's doing it in the name of someone else who is dead. It does not actually do anything or affect the dead person. It can only affect the dead person if the dead person was actually capable of being affected, meaning the dead person isn't really dead, they have some sort of afterlife. And if the Mormon ritual was efficacious, which would certainly mean that at least some parts of the Mormon religion were actually true. But if the Mormon religion were true, what is being bestowed upon the dead is a good thing. It is a way out of spirit prison. But the atheist wouldn't hear that. They wouldn't even understand the actual theology behind Mormon proxy baptism. In the way I normally heard it from militant atheists, they present it as if Mormons believe that once someone is proxy baptized for the dead, that dead person automatically becomes a Mormon in the afterlife, whether they would have chosen it or not. It goes against their consent, which isn't true. According to Mormon belief, once someone has been proxy baptized for the dead person who received the proxy baptism is given the choice to accept the proxy baptism or to decline it. So consent is not lost on this circuit. But the atheist community acted as if it was, as if the proxy baptism is something you're forcing on the dead. They also acted as if without proxy baptism they're just burning in hell, suffering eternal torture, which isn't what Mormons teach, but that's something else that they got into. But the real problem is that it really doesn't matter if they properly understood the theology behind proxy baptism. And theology is actually the wrong word. I'm using it as a conventionalization for people, but I'll get into that in another video. Or I'll continue to use the approximations of modern speech today. But here's the problem. The atheist kept saying that it was offensive to receive a proxy baptism, because that made the dead person count as a Mormon when they really weren't, or when they really would have opposed it. And they didn't really have evidence for this, but they would claim that Mormons would then parade famous dead people as having been Mormon when they weren't, and how offensive it is to the family and all that. And people would point out that this isn't how Mormons actually behave about proxy baptism, and again, if it actually works, then they're doing a good thing for the people, and if it doesn't work, then they're just getting wet in a pool in the name of a dead person? But the atheists kept insisting that this was some unacceptable problem. And they would invariably, if the conversation went on long enough, which didn't take too long if you understand that they don't have much else to say, is that they would start saying, how would you feel if religion X did a ritual for you? Which was always a silly argument to begin with, but it becomes even sillier considering that they insist that we see Mormons as a Christian denomination. Because in their minds, everyone who is telling them that Mormon proxy baptism is not a real issue is a Christian who isn't offended by it because it is a Christian ritual performed by other fellow believers, other Christians. But most Christians don't see Mormons as fellow Christians, and they have a perfectly valid reason not to, because the Mormon faith is too distinct from Christianity to truly be considered a Christian denomination like the atheists keep presenting it. But they act as if the reason Christians aren't offended by Mormon proxy baptism, even if they are not Mormon, is because they see Mormons as their fellow Christians and it's a Christian ritual. So they would invoke the big, scary, evil Muslim religion. How would you like it if Muslims did a ritual for you? How would you like it if Hindus did a ritual for you? Or some other religion? And you see this quite often with other things. When they falsely accuse Mother Teresa and her nuns of baptizing people against their will when they're dying, which never actually happened because that's not how the Catholic Church operates, and these are Catholic nuns, and they don't have a shred of evidence that someone was laying dying and they would pretend to be just wiping their head with a cloth, but it would count as a baptism. They had no evidence whatsoever that this was happening. But they would say it did, because Mother Teresa was the ghoul of Calcutta, an awful person who thought suffering brought people closer to God, so deliberately withheld pain medication, leaving people suffering. But then was a hypocrite who demanded, when she got sick, the best health care. Look at the great Christopher Hitchens. And they would tear into Mother Teresa because she sent all her money to the Vatican, didn't help anyone, gathered millions. None of what they say about Mother Teresa is true either. They're really just getting it from Christopher Hitchens and then lying about that and saying, we're not just getting it from Hitchens, we've got these other sources. And you'll often hear them say, I'll believe the people who were there and knew her, not you. But they're really just believing the same handful of cherry-picked sources, and a lot of it is just accusations they have no evidence for, like the aforementioned, she sent all the money to the Vatican and it didn't help anyone claim. But it still has the same point. I actually had an atheist ask me, how would you like it if you were sick and some Muslim performed a Muslim baptism on you and then decided to call you a Muslim? Which is silly, because Muslims don't perform baptisms. You do not become a Muslim by being baptized. You do not welcome Muhammad into your heart as your personal Lord and Savior and then get baptized as an outward sign of inward faith in Muhammad. There's no equivalent to baptism in Islam. And atheists listening to this may say that's beside the point, but it really isn't, because it shows how atheists don't think through the logical implications of what they're saying. But you see this quite often, because atheists will often whine about Christian relatives or Christian friends or Christian acquaintances at work saying, I'll pray for you, or can I pray for you, or I'll add you to my prayer list, or something along those lines. They say, I'm an atheist, I'm offended. I don't believe in their fairy tale God. Don't they realize saying that they'll pray for me is an offense to my beliefs? Well, no, they don't realize that, because being offended by this is absolutely absurd. Because atheism isn't really a lack of belief in a God. You can't take seriously the idea that it's a lack of belief in a God When people get angry and call God a delusion and a fairy tale, and they're angry that people are praying to their make-believe God. But it does bring up a point. Atheists assert as a fact, even though they have absolutely no evidence for it, that God does not exist. That is the claim that atheists make, that God does not exist, we live in a purely materialist universe, and naturalism is true. Supernatural powers do not exist. God does not exist. No God exists. Not the Christian God, Yahweh, not the Muslim God, Allah, none of them exist. They're all fake. Well, if atheists really believed that God did not exist, then a Christian praying for you is not going to change anything. And if God does exist, yes, I know, I should answer which God. Is it the Christian God, the Muslim God, some other God? Right now it doesn't matter. If any God exists, then even if the Christians pray, it shouldn't affect the atheists badly. It should not be negative. They're not praying for your death. So even if Christians are praying to their Christian God, Yahweh, but their religion is wrong, and the Muslim God, Allah, is the true God instead, it wouldn't matter. Because Allah is not going to be mad at the atheist for being prayed for by the false God, Yahweh. They would be mad, if anything. Allah would be mad at the person praying to the false God, Yahweh, and not to the atheist. And if the Christian is right, and the Christian God, Yahweh, is the true God, then the prayer is actually a petition of love. And really, I'm really tired of hearing the which God nonsense. I know a lot of Christians feed into this by saying Muslims worship a different God. Allah is not the same God. Allah just means the God in Arabic. Muslims do not worship a God named Allah. And Islam is an Abrahamic faith. And Muslims worship the same God as Christians. And yes, I know Allah has no sons. There's different. Well, Jews don't think Allah had a son either. I don't meet that many Christians who think Jews worship a different God. And I'm bringing this up because I'm just being fair. The atheists aren't the only ones who say stupid things. I honestly think that the idea that each religion has a different God is itself a bit of an atheistic belief. The idea is that since gods don't really exist, that each religion's description of their God is 100% accurate because they're describing a fictional character. Therefore, contradictions between the ideas of God would mean it's a different God, which is inconsistently applied anyway, since we say Protestants and Catholics worship the same God and they have very different theological understandings. We're not consistent in how we apply this, but in general we say, Allah in the Quran has no son. Yahweh, the Christian God, does. Therefore, the two fictional God characters are different. And Christians will use the same logic. They just won't call him a fictional God character. But to me, I think people disagree on the attributes of God. But since God does exist, we're simply making mistakes sometimes on the nature of God. For example, if a Christian believes in the Trinity and the Trinity is wrong, that doesn't necessarily mean all of the things Christianity teaches is wrong. And not all Christians even believe in the Trinity. The Church of God doesn't. Although they do teach that Jesus is God, they don't teach the Holy Spirit is God. Jehovah's Witnesses don't really believe in the Trinity. Though they might not really classify as Christian either, they are closer to it than Mormons. Mormons don't really believe in the Trinity in the same way that actual Christians do. They do claim to, but theirs is actually three separate beings, not just one God in three persons. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. To me, you can be wrong about some things and right about others, and that includes attributes of God, but God is still universal and understood in all of the world's cultures and philosophies, and even atheists who pretend to lack belief and have no concept of God. I mean, I lack belief so much that I don't even know what the word God means. They actually know what the word God means, or they wouldn't be able to talk about God. And the concept of God is something that they generally do actually know about. But therein lies the point. To be angry at someone who is offering to pray for you, or when you find out someone prays for you, or if you find out they lit a candle for you at Mass, or did some other ritual for you, assumes at the outset that that ritual is in some ways efficacious and will impact you. If I genuinely thought that no gods existed, that all gods were the product of human imagination, that humans invent gods in the God factory, as Robert Ingersoll called it, and Ingersoll is one of the ones they quote to pretend they can prove that Anthony Flew didn't invent the lack of belief in the God definition, but Ingersoll defined atheism as a lack of belief. Even though, according to them, Ingersoll wasn't an atheist, he was an agnostic, and there's this world of difference between that. The simple truth of the matter is, if gods don't exist, like the atheists actually claim, without evidence, I will remind you, but they do claim it, then someone praying to a god cannot affect the atheist in any meaningful way. It is only if a god exists that they can hear a prayer and answer it. And all of the talk about dignity and an affront to my beliefs, it doesn't really mean anything because you're just angry at someone who's trying to do something nice for you. But therein lies the real point. Because whenever I bring up this obvious fact to militant atheists, they never honestly evaluate what is being said. They never honestly evaluate what's being said, no matter what it is. They always twist one's words, no matter what the argument is, and this is no exception to that. Their natural instinct will always be to attack and to turn it around on you. So they will assume the speaker is Christian, which isn't always so. I've seen people make the same argument. The atheist assumes they're Christian, and then it turns out they're not. I even saw it where one of them would bring up some other religion like Islam, and it turned out the person was a Muslim. So, but the basic argument in their mind is simple. A Christian is telling you that you should not be offended by a Christian praying for you, or offering a Mass for you, or doing some other ritual for you. And they will always respond with, well, how would you feel if some other religion did that to you? How would you feel if a Muslim prayed for you? And they do the same thing when it's not just someone passively praying for you, but offering to include you in the prayer. This one might at least be a little more solid, although I don't think it's very legitimate either. The idea that the Muslim asks, can we pray together? But keep in mind, a Christian asking you if you want to pray with them is not demanding that you pray with them. And the same thing is true of Muslims. But they'll always do that. They'll always reverse it. So it's like, well, you're saying that you're going to pray for me. That's offensive to me. I'm an atheist. Keep your stupid delusional God ruling for yourself. You don't need to pray for me. It's offensive to me. And then you ask them why they're offended. If God doesn't really exist, this can't affect them. And they also want, how would you feel if it was a Muslim praying for you? Or in other circumstances, some other ritual. And it's supposed to be the mic drop moment for exposing the hypocrisy of Christians. Because my reaction as a Christian is supposed to be, no, it's different. And then I would use special pleading to explain why me, a Christian, praying for an atheist is good, but why a Muslim praying for me, a Christian, is bad. And of course, they would call me out on my special pleading. The only problem is I don't need to engage in special pleading, because such things have happened to me before. I have had a Muslim offer to pray for me. I have had Hindus decide to perform blessings for me. And my reaction was not to recoil in horror or to yell at them that they have affronted my beliefs. I thanked them because they are trying to be kind to me and include me in something good. A Muslim offering to pray for me is offering to petition Almighty God on my behalf. I remember when I was traveling once through LA and I met a Muslim. I don't know his name, we weren't friends, I didn't know him that well. But he did help me find some place that I didn't really know, and he was rather helpful. I don't really know much about him. We only spent maybe a couple of hours together because after he showed me where I needed to go and showed me what I needed to do, I offered to repay him, and I got him something. I can't remember what it was. It was food and a drink. Not alcohol, of course, but it was food and something. It was years ago. I don't remember exactly what it was. And he thanked me. We sat down, and I told him that I was in a certain business. A studio was considering using some work of mine as research work, and they may go with someone else. I don't know. But I had been short on funds, and I really needed this to go through, and the Muslim offered to pray for me so that I could get the job. And I did get the job. It was a short-term gig work, of course, but I got the job. I got paid. And instead of responding to the Muslim, "I'm not a Muslim. That offends me. Keep your religion to yourself," I thanked him. And I didn't just thank him out of some sort of facade of courtesy, whilst internally being some sort of raging furnace of wrath. I honestly felt that he was trying to help me, and I honestly felt gratitude toward him. His prayers weren't offensive to me at all. It isn't just that I didn't act offended. I wasn't offended by a Muslim praying for me. It is absurd to me to be offended by a Muslim who worships the same God that I do, praying to that same God on my behalf. Because even if I disagree with certain things that he believes, at the end of the day, he is petitioning God on my behalf out of an act of kindness. Why would I be offended by that? And I remember going to a convention and talking to some Krishnas, and they had a nice conversation with me about religion. I study religion. I was able to talk about their religion more knowledgeably than most people they had met that day. They sold me some books, and I gladly paid for them to help their temple. They were selling books as a fundraiser, and I got the books in exchange, of course. And then they decided to do a very short blessing for me. And I didn't say, wait, I'm a Christian, how dare you offend my beliefs, Hindus? I accepted the blessing because why not? And again, like with the Muslim, it wasn't that I was putting on a facade of calm, but underneath I was angry and offended. I wasn't, because I realized that the Hare Krishnas were performing a blessing for me because they wanted to do something nice and kind for me. It was utterly irrelevant to me that they had a different religion than I did. Their intent was not malicious. Why would I be offended by that? And of course, I'm with a Jewish woman now, so I've been to Jewish rituals and had similar experiences. But the Muslim thing in LA happened before I even met her. So this isn't something that I learned after being with a Jewish woman. It's something that has always been true of me. I've been perfectly willing to accept people's different religious views and practices, because I don't think that people who are offering to pray for me, even if they're Muslims, or even if they're Hindus, or even if they're Taoists or something, are doing so maliciously, and I honestly see no reason to be offended. And yet, the atheist calls me a hypocrite, because I tell them they shouldn't be offended when a Christian prays for them, because I would be offended if some other religion did that for me, and I'm not. And it's not just prayer. The blessing ritual that the Hare Krishnas did, granted it wasn't some elaborate ritual, but it was a ritual. I wasn't offended by it at all. Why would I be? And therein lies the point. Modern-day atheists, the militant variety, the type that follow Christopher Hitchens and Daniel Dennett and Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins and all that, the new atheist phase that was popular 20 years ago, or their successors like Pologia or the Myth Vision podcast and all that, the Prophet of Zod, things like that. These aren't serious objections. When they object to people praying for them, they're doing so performatively, pretending that something is offensive when it's not. Because the real goal is to instill in people's minds that the belief itself is offensive and should not be held. They're not actually trying to make any sort of valid point about anything. They're just trying to instill in people an unease at expressing their beliefs in the hope that they can control their behavior, because if you control people's behaviors and get them to act as if they don't believe something, then a good deal of the time they do begin to lose that belief and accept the beliefs that they're enacting in their behaviors. This doesn't happen with everyone, but it does happen a great deal. A good way of changing people's beliefs is to change their behaviors. And they're trying to get the idea in your head that you should behave differently. And the reason that works is because if you couple it with the idea that there's something wrong with a belief, such as that it's offensive, and you start deliberately acting against that belief, doing things that you would do if you didn't believe in them, then the combination of viewing the belief itself as the problem, it's offensive somehow, and you have to keep it to yourself, combined with not acting on it physically, does erode the belief itself in most people. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to control what people say and how people behave, to align them with their own secular humanist beliefs, while lying to us about merely lacking belief in a God and not having beliefs to impose on us when they very clearly do. The atheists in the modern world often try and impose beliefs on people, and it's very obvious that that's what they're doing. But it's rather ridiculous when you think about it, because what they replace religion with isn't neutral secularism. It's secularism as religion. They write manifestos and have organizations promoting political and social changes, all based on fundamental principles that they hold, whilst telling us that they don't hold these beliefs, and then they do impose them on us, and then they tell us that we're offensive if we even remotely offer to do something for them out of our beliefs. So it's obvious that they're really just trying to impose beliefs by force, rather than passively lacking belief. I don't have much else to say, so I shall take my leave of you now. Thank you, God bless, and goodbye.